Hear me out. What if a penguin wore its heart on its chest? Let's do a painting for Valentine's Day, wild development style. Valentine's Day is about who we choose to care for. Let's celebrate love beyond romance, and let's celebrate love for wildlife. This penguin painting is an intentional reminder that love deserves our attention and protection. Materials we need for this project: watercolor paper, our outline, a pencil, Micron pen, a number 12 brush, paper towel, a palette, paint, some water, and a spray bottle. For the next step, you're going to take your outline and place it on top of the light box, and then place your watercolor paper on top and trace. And then when we're done with that, we will use a permanent marker to outline what we did in graphite. And I will fast forward through that part. Go ahead and erase those pencil marks. Once it reacts with the water, the pencil lines are very difficult, if not impossible, to lift. So make sure you erase those lines now, and if you're handling that paper, make sure you've got nice, clean, dry hands. Otherwise, the oils in our skin will react with the paint. Okay, now we are ready to dive in and start painting our penguin. This is an African penguin, and the photo reference that you see is from the Georgia Aquarium. And when we saw this guy last year with the little heart on his chest, my son was like, "You have to paint him, Mom." So that's what we're doing, just in time for Valentine's Day, with that adorable little heart. I don't know what his name is, but I hope it is something revolving around love or Valentine's Day or something like that. So we're going to take our paints, these are already on my tray, and spray them down to activate them. Then get my brush wet. Now we're going to puzzle piece this in a way so that we're working from head to toe and left to right, so that hopefully we're not getting our hands in the paint and messing it up, and also so that it's drying in a way that we can go back and work on different areas. So we're gonna start with the head. It is black in this area and also along this area. And I'm not using black, I'm using a Payne's gray, which is pretty dark. It's got some blue undertones, and I like using that color because it adds a little bit more dimension. So I'm gonna mix up a little puddle of Payne's gray so I can keep dipping into that. Let's move this over. I'm gonna clean off my brush, and then I'm gonna get the area over by his eye and beak wet, just that main area. And you don't want it too wet, just a nice sheen. And we're gonna drop in some color for that wet on wet effect. We're gonna let the watercolor bloom and do its thing that it naturally does, and it'll add some cool little effects that will give some natural highlights and depth to your image. The penguins are pretty perfect to talk about for Valentine's Day because most species of penguin will mate for life. They are monogamous. And if you're familiar with pop culture, penguins were really popular around the time that like Happy Feet came out, and Bob Saget did March of the Penguins. Was it March of the Penguins? It was a satire with penguins. That is not for children, by the way. And they show penguins giving rocks to what they want to be their significant other. And that is true. Gen 2 penguins and Adelie penguins will do that. They'll present rocks. They will spend time searching for the perfect rock to present to their loved ones. So I thought that is pretty cool that humans are not the only species that are obsessed with rocks. Penguins are too. This water is just all sorts in the way. I'm going in and getting some of those little details. Penguins have about 70 to 90 feathers per square inch. So it would be pretty impossible to paint every single feather. So we're just giving the illusion of feathers. So these nice little jaggedy lines help to give the illusion. It also helps that you don't have to be perfect when you're painting this. If it's a little more jaggedy than you thought it would be, or your brush went wild, maybe just your penguin looks like that, and that's fine. Maybe it's having a bad feather day. Who knows? Well, I mean, there are penguins that have bad feather days. Penguins do molt their feathers once a year. And so they lose all their feathers and grow new ones in, and they look like they have a really bad case of bedhead. Your cold weather species of penguins, oh, if you're new here, this is a warm weather species of penguins. Our first penguin that we painted was the Humboldt penguin, and that is a warm weather species of penguin. I'll show him here. Warm weather penguins have a patch of skin somewhere along their face that is bare, and they can't sweat, so that bare skin will help them to release excess heat. Also, they have less feathers around that ankle area, and the feet will be pink. And depending on how hot they are is how red it is or pink it is, just like when we're hot. This is an African penguin, and they have a little patch of pink right above the eye here. So when penguins molt their feathers, cold weather species, they kind of do it all at the same time. But for your warm weather penguins, they will do it at different times so that the entire colony is not all at risk at the same time, because they've got different predators to look out for and things like that. So I'm happy with how it looks right here around the beak and the eye. So I'm moving on to this little strip right here and adding some color in there. I didn't get it wet this time because it's a pretty small area to work with. And again, just being kind of loose with putting those feathers in, nice and jaggedy. So African penguins are the species that I used to work with. And they are so adorable and cute. Each one have their own unique personality. They are a ton of fun to work with. They are a little stinky. They eat fish, which is stinky in and of itself, and then they go to the bathroom about every 20 minutes. All right, so we're gonna let these areas dry. Now I'm gonna work on the left wing, then we're gonna get this strip on the belly, and then we're gonna get the right wing here. So this area here is gonna be white, and then along the edge, and then these little spots in the middle are gonna be painted in. And on each penguin, it's a little bit, their patterns are all a little bit different. That is one way that you're able to tell them apart. You can't tell if a penguin is a male or female just simply by looking at them. There is no sexual dimorphism like you would see in a cardinal. A male cardinal is red and a female cardinal is tan. But you can tell apart the individuals by looking at their distinct markings. And on this guy, he's got that adorable little heart. Now, African penguins live at the bottom of the continent in Cape Town, South Africa. And when I first started working with them, they had, and this was early 2010s, they had just been put on the endangered species list. And part of our presentation was explaining to guests things that they can do to help this species and why they are on the endangered species list. And when I was checking my facts before filming, because it's been a few years, you know, you forget things over time. I just want to make sure I wasn't completely making anything up. And I was very sad to learn that since I've left that position, penguins have gone from being on the endangered species list to critically endangered as of 2024, which means they are at threat for becoming extinct, which is very sad. If you have a zoo or aquarium near you, I highly suggest checking out the species, learning a little bit more about them and why we should protect these guys. They're so amazing. It's sad to lose any species, but this is something that we can do to help protect them, learn about them, and know that things like overfishing is causing their decline, their rapid decline. We're taking their food literally right out, well, not literally right out of their mouths. That'd be really hard to do, but you get what I mean. We're taking the food from them because they're not practicing sustainable fishing practices. Now, an easy way that you can help from wherever you are in the world, I'm in the United States, is if you eat seafood, you can get something called the Seafood Watch Card. And it is a little something, and they even have an app. All right, now that I've finished with this wing, I'm gonna move on to this area right here. And I am going to get the middle a little bit wet first. So the Seafood Watch, they have an app too. It's a little bit easier than carrying something in your wallet. And it will let you know if a fish is sustainably sourced or if it is something that you should not be eating. And most reputable restaurants, if you ask the waitress or waiter, they should be able to tell you or find out for you. So that's one thing you can do. Definitely learn more about them and help donate to places like Sandcob. Sandcob is an amazing organization in Cape Town, South Africa that will rescue and rehabilitate penguins. Another reason why they are threatened is the loss of habitat. When they create their burrows, they dig a hole in the sand and they help. Well, they produce their own concrete, let's just say, or material to make concrete. They will go to the bathroom, aka guano, and that helps when it mixes with the sand. It creates this concrete-like substance, and that's their burrow where they will raise their young. And unfortunately, guano makes a really good fertilizer. and people will harvest the guano. So we're stealing their homes. So not only are we taking food from them, we are literally stealing their homes. So if you're fertilizing, check where that comes from. They also use the guano for another reason. And I am very new to YouTube, so I'm not going to risk getting a strike so early on in my career. But if you do a quick search, you can find out some other things that we use penguin guano for and bat guano. Again, just going in and giving the suggestion of feathers. He's got such a unique marking. It's so cool. Another thing threatening penguins is oil pollution, oil spills. So, a couple different things. They got threats from different predators. They got the Cape seal in the area. Sharks, yeah, great white sharks in the Cape Town area. But I feel like, oh no, that's okay. Oh, balls. Okay, I struggle busting there for a minute. Sorry about that. So if you happen to do what I did and you had a little whoopsie, you can clean off your brush really well and use some water and gently scrub the area. You got to be careful though, depending on your paper. Arches paper, you can beat it up a little bit more than this Lita paper. I was starting to take the paper up a little bit, but you know, not too concerned about this area. I think once we have a finished piece, you're not really going to notice. And then this, maybe that's going to be a spot on the belly or something later. Never give up on your piece. Always see it through to the finish, because one, you're definitely going to learn something along the way. And you don't want to set the standard that you're giving up on yourself, or that's pretty dramatic. It's just a piece of paper. But, you know what I mean? You don't want to be in that habit where like, I'm just going to give up. See it through. See what you can learn. And maybe you can save it. I had a watercolor instructor, and he was working on a piece for days. Like, he put in lots and lots of hours in this, and he spilled phthalo green or blue in an area that was supposed to be really light, and he almost scrapped the entire thing. And he didn't. He kept going. He was able to figure out something. I think he soaked the area for a while, and so he learned a lesson. He learned how to fix it, and he entered it into an art show, and then he got first place. If he had just given up when he did, he wouldn't have won. And it's not about winning, but hey, it feels pretty good sometimes, right? So yeah, just keep going and see what happens, see what you can learn. And sometimes when you do step back from it from a little while, or you revisit it later, you're like, hey, I actually do like it. Or maybe you can do some splatters on your page and do something to cover it up. So I went on a little bit of a tangent there because, you know, a lot of times if you're working on a really big art piece, if I'm doing a pet portrait commission, it goes through an ugly stage for sure. And you're like, I have no idea how it's going to look good at the end. And you just keep working at it, keep going layer by layer, step by step, and eventually it all comes together. And gosh, I know I say this a lot, but again, it is a lot like life. You got to keep going and keep pushing through the hard parts. And eventually you're going to step back and you're going to realize you've reached the finish line and you've got something really beautiful at the end. And even if it's not beautiful at the end, maybe you've learned a lesson and you can help share that knowledge with other people and inspire them to keep going through their darkest hours. Man, I'm just giving y'all a little pep talk today, and I think talking about the doom and gloom with these poor guys being a critically endangered species now is just really sad. I spent many hours with about 7 to 8 of these guys, depending on, you know, when it was, and spent a lot of time talking to hundreds, if not thousands, of strangers, and kind of feels like, you know, what even was all that for if they're worse off than they were 10 years ago? But they're not gone. There's still hope. We can still keep fighting. But let's talk about something more positive, like the fact that, well, we talked about penguins will mate for life, and both the mom and the dad will have a part in helping to raise their young. With the African penguin, I think the cutest thing is when they flirt with each other. And you know they start to get flirty with each other when they get two kind of across from each other, and they stand up straighter and like their neck gets longer and they kind of curve their head down, and they'll waddle over to each other, and then they bump beaks really fast back and forth. And so they're slapping beaks with each other, and then they will both start braying. And when they bray, they sound like a donkey, which is the other name for this species, is the Jack A word, another word for a donkey, penguin. And that's their way of flirting with each other. Like, hey, I like you. Hey, I like you too. So that's really cute. And they will hang out with each other in pairs. All right, so there are lots of little details in this area. That's okay, just take your time, go slow, be mindful of where you are in the page so that you're not dipping your hand into the wet paint. But we already discovered we can fix that a little bit. And we're gonna keep going if we make a mistake. And we're not gonna give up. You know, a lot of times people are like, I wish I can do what you do. I can never do it. And I spent many, many hours practicing. And you can do anything that you want to do. You just gotta practice and find ways to do it. Even if it's just a couple minutes a day, you learn a little something every time. All right, we're almost done with this middle band on this penguin. Now, if you painted the first penguin with me, or you can go back and do it. Well, now that I'm looking at it, it's kind of a bad example. Typically, African penguins, their belly stripe is thinner than on the Humboldt penguin. So this guy, very unique patterns. I don't think I've ever seen an African penguin with this much black on his belly. But one of the main differences that you will always be able to tell is the Humboldt penguin has this pink right along the beak and by the eye. And the African penguin, you'll see when we start painting in a little bit, they only have the pink right through here. So a lot less pink. That's one way to tell. That's the funny thing about sciences and animals in particular is you always talk about, hey, this species does this, but there always seems to be an exception to the rule with everything. Ew, excuse me. Speaking of sneezing, penguins can sneeze too. I believe, and I will fact check myself a little bit, I believe they're doing that to get the salt water out of their nose. And these guys, when they swim, they can hold their breath for about, I believe it's 5 minutes. And they are birds. And even though they are birds, again, we're talking about exceptions to the rule, they don't fly. But they do have these wings, and they are very powerful. They act almost like paddles in the water to help them propel and swim through the water. It almost looks like they're flying underwater. They can maneuver very quickly. But it makes sense because they gotta swim fast and they gotta be able to maneuver because they have to catch fish to eat. So this guy is a little bit more detailed than some of the other projects so far, but take your time, go slow, enjoy the process, enjoy the journey. It's not just about getting to the end. Okay. Now we've got the middle section done, and I'm gonna work on this side of the wing. And I might fast forward that section up, just because you've already seen how that's done. If you need to pause the video so you can catch up, feel free to do so. I'm gonna go in and add some black to the tail. This can be really in any sort of pattern. The entire tail isn't necessarily black. Again, it's going to depend on which individual you're looking at. If you want to just go ahead and make the entire tail black, you can. But if you don't, we'll go back later and add a little bit of shadow under that line. Okay. So now I'm going to get some water and some of that Payne's gray, and I'm going to make a tea-like consistency. So you can kind of see through it a little bit. And then I'm going to go in and do the beak, and just all in that same tea-like consistency. I'm going to clean off my brush a little bit. It's a little bit darker than I wanted right now. So we're going to build up some layers and really give the impression that it is an African penguin beak. So you can see these little ridges and stuff. Their beaks are made out of the same material as our fingernails, which is keratin, and it grows their entire life. And there are things they can do naturally to file down their beak, rubbing it along rocks and things like that. And if they don't, the beak can get really long, and sometimes when they're under professional care, they'll need to get a little trim, and it doesn't hurt them. Just like it doesn't hurt you when you get your fingernails trimmed. Even though, like, if you ask a toddler, they would probably beg to differ. And then I'm doing these nice long strokes too, to help give that impression of that nice jaggedy beak. All right. So then while I have this shade already done, I'm going to go in and do some shadows by the wing and then also by the tail. So this side, you can't really tell because it's already really dark, but I am still going to go through and add that shadow. I'm also going to clean off my brush a little bit and add a little bit of water right here to help soften up the shadow. I'm going to go over to the other side of the wing. Again, add that line right down on the shadow, or on the wing. And blending it out again. And then the other area we're going to add a shadow is right underneath the tail. And it is still wet right here. So I'm going to grab a hair dryer and I'm going to very gently blow that with the hair dryer and let that dry. And I will be right back. All right, we're back. We're taking some more of that tea-like consistency for the shadow now that this area is dry, and just going in. I'm going to go in a little bit darker on the shadow because it's like really behind the body and underneath the body, and then taking some water and just softening it up a little bit. All right, there's the shadow for the tail. also, while we have this tea-like Payne's Gray mixed up, I'm going to go in and do the rock that it's standing on. I'm just going to get the entire rock area. So this is the first time we've done some background elements in the tutorial so far, but we've not done something that's kind of an element of the background where it's natural to their environment. We've done splashes and splatters and kind of halos around. It's good to practice natural elements too. And this guy's standing on what looks like a boulder. These guys are actually from Boulders Beach, South Africa. And if you love the beach and you love penguins, look up some of those images of these guys on this beautiful beach. Almost doesn't look like they should go together, but they do. So the little lines that we did in black earlier with the Micron pen will help to add some dimension to your rock. Now we're adding the color. A little bit later on, we're going to go back in with some watercolor on a dry brush and add a little bit more detail to our rock to help make it look a little bit more realistic. You don't have to be too careful around the feet. We are going to paint it a darker color of Payne's Gray over top in a little bit. So if you have an oopsie, that's fine. Or if you're just like, bloop, I don't care, that's fine too. And, but if you want to practice, you know, brush control and going around those toenails, you can do that too. And the way that it's going to dry on the paper, it's also going to help give it some texture to those rocks too, or the boulder. So now we're going to get the pink around the eye. So I've got this crimson color. I'm going to spray it down to reactivate it. Dry it out a little bit. So I already have that from a previous project. That was the flamingo project. And if you have a lighter pink, you can use a lighter pink. I decided to go with the crimson because, you know, we're doing this for Valentine's Day, so we got to stay on theme. And I'm going to take some white gouache and mix it in with the crimson. It's still a little too dark, so I'm going to go in with more gouache. You want a big puddle because we're going to do that little spot by the eye, but then we're also using the same color for the feet. You want to make sure you got enough for the feet. And then you're also going to, because once we do the eye, we'll go into the feet. And then we're also going to need some indigo to drop in, because that wet on wet together will bloom out and make some really neat effects. All right, I'm going to get a little bit more white gouache, and then I think I'll be happy with it. I'm almost happy with it right now, but it is going to dry a little bit darker than what you see. And I do want it to show up. I mean, sometimes if the penguin's not very hot at all, it's almost like a very, very, very light pink, and you can't even hardly tell it's pink at all. But since, you know, he's got the little heart, and we're doing this for Valentine's Day, I want it to show up. All right, I'm gonna go in and put the pink in around the eye. And if it's a little jaggedy, that's okay, because they have those feathers around that area. All right, I'm going to spray down my Payne's Gray real quick so I get a little puddle going. Because we're going to drop some color into the feet. All right, just go ahead and paint those feet pink. And if you happen to mess up and get some pink into those feathers and you don't like it, you can always go back in with the Payne's Gray because it's darker and paint over it. I think that watercolor is very forgiving, and there are multiple options to work with and get around obstacles. Although if I go to someplace like, I think it's called Painting with a Twist, is where I went last, and they're like, they work in acrylic, and they're like, oh, no, you do watercolor? No, we stay away from that. That's hard. And we, as in like her and her friends, I don't speak for the company. And she went to college and is professionally trained, and she still stays away from watercolor. And I think it is one of the easiest, most accessible forms of art. I mean, that's, when I think back to elementary school and art, I think of the Crayola watercolors. It's one of the first things we played with. So from a young age, we're taught watercolors in art class, and I don't know why we get scared of it. It can be as simple or as detailed as you want. Now, the details in the feet on the African penguins, it's all different depending on which one you're looking at. You don't have to be too precise. You don't have to look at the reference photo. It's just kind of everywhere out there. So on some of them, you're going to see more pink up here towards the ankle and in between the webbing. So if you wanted to do that, you can do that. But I'm dropping it in while it's wet because it's going to spread out and blend nicely. Because it's got some white gouache in there, it's blending together, and you're getting more of a lighter gray. You can always go back in with your indigo if you want to darken it up a bit. Don't make a liar out of me. Boop. You don't want to add too much in there right now because we are going to let it dry, and then we'll come back to it and add some detail. Now, those toenails are black or dark gray, so I am going to paint in the toenails now. It's okay if it blends out. Oh, you know what? I forgot to put on ocean sounds. There we go, a little bit of ambiance with the ocean sounds. I realized in my first couple videos that it was kind of quiet if I'm thinking while I'm painting. This is just ocean sounds from Florida. I picked up a little bit of paint because I had some white in here, so I'm touching that up. And now I'm going to get the other foot. And I did do 1 foot at a time so that I can drop in that Payne's gray while the foot was still wet. So now that we got our ocean sounds, we can pretend that we're at Cape Town, South Africa too. This is from my podcast, Wildly Unplugged. And I just recorded the beach while I was at St. Pete and uploaded it because I wanted it to feel like those CDs from the way back in the 1900s. I'm gonna give you that like ambiance feel. My favorite one was whale sounds growing up. They also at one point had the one that had like Enya and, oh gosh, I'm not gonna sing it. Don't sing it. Don't embarrass yourself. I'm not gonna sing it. But it's like a guy chanting. I had that one. I'll have to look it up and see what it's called. But yeah, I was kind of going for that vibe when I was uploading this. I also have like from a creek, some creek sounds and frogs. And what was the other one I had? I have some bird sounds. And I took the bird sounds and loaded them in to the program to edit my film, and AI decided to translate the bird sounds, and it was pretty crazy what it thinks the birds are saying. I feel like I should post it, but it's so crazy I don't know that I want to. Alright, so I went in pretty thick with the paint, so it's going to take a minute to dry. So I'm going to, once I'm done here, oh, see, there we go. See, now I'm not a liar. You can add that Payne's gray to darken it up a bit. And sometimes watercolor can be predictable and sometimes it's not. Okay. So I am going to let this dry, and then when it is dry, we're going to come back and work on it a little bit more. Okay, I internally debated on whether or not to make this a teachable moment or not. I could leave it like this. If you want to leave it like this, that's totally fine. But I'm a little picky. And I'm gonna try and add another layer of pink. So it is starting to dry a little bit. I'm going to go in with some more crimson. You can see the crimson there. And then some more gouache. So the gouache is very similar to watercolor in that you can reactivate it with water. That's why I can let this dry on the palette and come back to it later and just spray it with water, and then I can paint with it again. But it is also like acrylic in the sense that it is not see-through. So I can, now that I'm happy with the color, go back in and paint over what we just did. If you are just working in watercolors, there are some art teachers out there that are purists and they're like, you have to only use watercolor. Yeah, it's your piece. You can use whichever materials you like. But if you're only using watercolor, if you had a lighter color, you could always go back in with a darker color and fix it. I'm gonna add some little like dots in there. So yeah, I wanted to make this a teachable moment. So we're talking about not giving up on your piece and figuring out ways to make it work. So that's what I'm gonna do. I find that whenever, as I'm learning as an adult, if I talk about something negative per se, like I did, for instance, I did a speech on nature journaling in St. Augustine, and at the very beginning of the speech, I guess I was having some imposter syndrome, and I said, you know, this is nothing new. It's not like I discovered nature journaling. And what I did do, and I guess I didn't give enough value to that, is I shared my stories and my experience with nature journaling. But because I said that one piece that I am not going to teach you anything new if you're familiar with nature journaling, that one person decided to put that in the review. I had good reviews overall, but this one review, she's like, I didn't learn anything new. And I was like, but you didn't know my stories or how I applied it in different situations. So I feel like I need to just have more confidence. Your story, it matters. You have value, and yeah, you might not have invented something or discovered something, but you have different experiences than other people do. All right, so I'm liking how that's looking, and I'm going to dry off my brush a little bit and kind of blend it out. And up close, it's going to look ugly, but when you kind of back up from it, it makes it look a little bit more natural. So I am glad I decided to make this a teachable moment. I don't want to gatekeep around here. We gotta share our tips and tricks. That's how we all get better. I'm really noticing that as I'm learning watercolor, and I feel that I'm always learning. I love taking new classes from different artists because they do things differently than I do, and maybe I'll adapt that to my practice, or maybe not. Maybe I just, from taking that class, have learned another way of doing things. I'm gonna add some little lines across here, across the little ankle. They don't have to be perfect, they're squiggly. Nature's not perfect, so the squigglier, the better. And drying my brush off a little bit and just kind of blending stuff out. Okay. So now I'm happy with how that looks. Now I'm going to move back up to the beak and adding a more medium shade. Kind of a more milky consistency with that Payne's gray. Now, on a lot of African penguins, they kind of have a lighter patch right here and here, kind of like at the third mark or so. So I'm going to try my best not to go into those areas. And make sure my brush is clean, and then go in with that more medium tone and build up the layers. And if you're afraid of doing the layers, which I encourage you to try if you've never done it before. But if you're afraid that you might ruin what you got, you don't have to do that. You can leave the beak the way it is. But this is a good opportunity to practice layering. A lot of watercolor is in the layering. And we're going to go back a little bit later when it's dry and add some more detail with a thicker paint. Not quite the out of the tube consistency, but thicker than the milky consistency that it is now. So I'm going to take a clean, wet, mostly damp brush and just kind of go over the edges. I don't like really harsh edges. So you'll see me going back in and blending it out a bit, especially if I'm doing like a pet portrait or a bigger animal piece. All right. So I like how the beak is looking here. Now that we've done that, we can go in and work on his eyeball. So I've got burnt umber. I'm just dipping in with a wet brush, making sure it's kind of that tea consistency. And I'm gonna get the entire eyeball. Now this part's already dry. We did that earlier. So I'm not worried about it bleeding into different areas. So we're doing the tea consistency over the whole eyeball. And then what I like to do, you can leave it like this, but what I like to do to really add some depth to the eyeball is I'm gonna get some nice, thick, milky consistency on my brush and just go along the outside edge, and it's going to bloom into the center and make the eyeball look a little bit more realistic. And if you don't have a burnt umber color, you can use whatever color eye you want for your penguin. Sure there's a penguin species. Maybe it's the macaroni. He's got like red eyeballs. He looks very angry. All right. So that's how I do the eyeball real quick to make it look realistic or more realistic. So now, while this area dries, I'm gonna go back in with the feet and add some details there. I'm going in with some of that milky consistency paint. And I'm also gonna kind of dry off my brush a bit, kind of at the base of the barrel, touching the paper towel to it to help soak up some of that water. And just kind of dry brushing over this area. So we do have some wet paint, but we made it a little bit drier. And we're just going in and kind of wiggling the brush around, adding some texture. And dipping in, getting some more paint, drying the bottom of the barrel of the brush. And then just kind of holding the brush sideways and going in with some texture. You see already how that layering is helping to add some depth. Now the nail got a little pinky in there, so I'm gonna darken it up a little bit and add a little line create the illusion of the start of the nail. And maybe add some little squiggly lines inside here. All right, so I'm happy with how those feet look. I'm also going to dry brush into the rocky area. And actually, the rocks look pretty cool as is, but I do want to show you. And since I already have some Payne's Gray on here, I'm really going to make sure the brush is dry and drying down the barrel of the brush and going in sideways and just laying down some color. You can see how the texture, when you do it sideways, the texture of the paper really gets picked up. I'm not going to go in too crazy. I'm also going to add some shadows underneath the feet. It is mostly dry. I'm just going to be careful by that toenail is a little wet. I'm going to go in with that tea-light consistency. We're just going to outline right underneath the feet to give them a little shadow. Oh, my ocean wave stopped. Started again. Darken up the shadow a little bit. I'm just kind of letting it bloom out towards where it's already wet. And now it kind of looks like he's standing on that rock instead of just kind of floating on top of it. One in with some darker, and just let it blend out. Okay, so now we're gonna go in with a beak. I'm gonna pull my reference photo back up. So on the beak, I am going to grab some thicker paint. So you can see it's not quite like when it comes out of the tube, but it's a little bit thicker than milky consistency. And those little jaggedy lines from before, I'm just gonna go in and darken them up a bit. Just wiggle them around. Nice, fast and loose. With them. So we've added some detail into the beak. Now, to add a little highlight to the eyeball, I'm going to clean off my brush. I'm going to grab some white gouache. I like to add a lighter bit. I'm going to clean off my brush and pick some of it up so it is a little bit see-through. So usually when you look at the reflection on somebody's eye, you've got a little bit of light where you can still see through and see the eye, and then sometimes the light's so bright that it's just one little dot of white. So I'm going to go in and add a little dot of white, but then I've also got that kind of see-through bit of white. I'm going to let that dry. Usually dries pretty quick. I'm just going to do this. fan it off a little bit. And then I'm gonna go in with my shadow mix and add a little bit right at the very top, because that lid on the eyeball creates a shadow. Darken it up a little bit. It really helps to make your eye look more realistic, is adding the highlights and adding a shadow. So there you have it. Now we have our little completed African penguin with his heart. Congratulations on finishing your Valentine's Day penguin painting. When you are done, make sure you sign your piece. Once you have signed your piece, it is done. No more touching or messing with it. If you've learned something today about painting and about penguins, let it inspire you to do something to protect nature. Until next time, get outside, see what develops, and stay wild.